Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar featuring Traction Complete and 1Password. I am Gina. I am the Partner Success Manager here at Rev Genius. And today I'm going to hand off conversation to our data experts in the room, David Nelson, CEO of Traction Complete, and Navin Prasad, VP of Revenue Operations at 1Password. Thank you both for joining us today. Dave, do you want to go ahead and take the reins and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Gina. And thank you for having me. And thank you for putting together this amazing community. I love seeing what you guys have done and how all the community members are collaborating together in order to learn from one another. It's really cool. So hopefully we can give something back today and contribute ourselves.
Awesome.
At Traction Complete, we believe that data can be this incredible instruction set for businesses if it's done properly. And so we're on a mission to try and help revenue operations and go-to-market leaders get more out of their data in order to make better data-driven decisions. And today, we're very fortunate to be joined by Navin Prasad, who's the VP of Revenue Operations at 1Password. And he actually comes to us with over 20 years experience in RevOps. He's an absolute expert in not only operations, but all things data. So yeah, Navin, thank you very much for joining. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, can do. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Rev Genius. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity just to give back to community. It feels good to share back, because I know when I was first starting out, just learning from those who have done it wasn't as easy. So this is great. Navin Prasad, VP RevOps, leading a team of 20, supporting a go-to-market engine of probably 10x that size. I've held similar positions at other SaaS orgs over the last 8 years. And then I like to think of it as my second career because my first career was 15 plus years at IBM. And ironically enough, I started in sales. So the struggle is real and I really know what it's about.
That's awesome, because you'll now understand both sides of the fence, why that data is being entered the way it is, and what you have to do about it afterwards.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
Good. Well, yeah. Thanks so much, Navin. Today, guys, we are talking about data quality and primarily 5 of the pitfalls that you can fall into. And when people tend to think about data quality, they're usually jump to data cleanliness. And that's certainly one critical pillar to data quality. But there's actually a lot more to consider. There's the accuracy of your data, the completeness, whether it was filled in or not, the consistency amongst teams and members, the uniqueness, are there duplicates or not? And then, of course, the timeliness, because as we all know, things change and data starts to decay over time. But if you're able to do that, if you're able to be successful in cleaning up all that data and making it timely, etc., you should be able to make very accurate decisions for your business. But unfortunately, we all know that's not usually the case, that there's a lot of things that come up and a lot of reasons why it's easier said than done. So today we're going to help kind of identify 5 of the many critical pitfalls that negatively affect your business so that you can help avoid them in the future. So Navin, if we dig in, as RevOps, you know that you have a lot of different systems across all your teams, and that data quality impacts your entire go-to-market team. But because they're collecting that data in different systems, what pitfalls do you commonly see that those folks fall into?
Yeah, and it's to be clear, it's not just the systems I own, it's the systems I partner with across other functions in the org. If you're an inbound business, you have a marketing function that's driving demand, and then there's a handoff that moves over to sales. Once sales is done with that data, it moves to finance, it may move to a data warehouse, and each of those things are doing or performing a role for the business. But what's often missed, as you said off the top, is my data clean? Well, that's sort of the whack-a-mole game. I guess the first thing you need to understand is what does the map of that data look like as it's entering the systems, and how is it being augmented from lead to cash and all the way through? Sort of who owns it? Is there change management? What kind of communication do you have across those teams so that if change is made in one area, how is it replicated downstream so that it's understood and maintained and accommodated accordingly? I think the key thing here is having really good alignment across the departments so that you have good stewardship over that data.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And how do you typically see that manifest if it's not done properly amongst the teams?
Well, I mean, I guess I would say I'm fortunate in that I've seen bad, so I hope to know what good looks like. But yeah, I've been in some places where I can't just I can only just pause, and it's difficult because you inherit it and you struggle with where to start. And I think their good starting point is to like step back and really try and map it out, understand like where is data entering the system and what does it look like, and then how is it flowing across, and then who owns those things. I think you really need to like whiteboard it and really think about like here are all the entry points and here's what you want, and then what can you do along the way that not only helps you get better data, but also puts minimum strain and impact around your customers, which for me are the sales org, right? They're the customers of the RevOps team. And while there are certain things I'm going to say I absolutely have to capture because it's table stakes, the other things would be nice to have. And I don't want to make both a required set on that journey so that I then get like pushback from using the systems or harder to do the thing I thought I was making easier.
That's such a good point. Yeah, and I love that you frame it that way, that the customer of RevOps is the sales team or the marketing team, whatnot, that it's not your end customer, that they're the trickle down kind of thing. But when you're then seeing that, when you're trying to make it easier on those folks, on the sales teams, the marketing teams and whatnot, how are you, what are some tactics and whatnot that you're putting in place to make their lives easier so that you can facilitate that mapping between systems?
Yeah, so thing one would be absolute change management. If we're going to change something in a feeder system or a core system, and there's an integration there, really understand and manage that. I've seen instances where people thought they were doing great things by putting in validation roles in their CRM, but then broke their marketing integration because the marketing system just wasn't giving that data and passing it along. So without good thought, you're actually creating more work for yourself and then trying to both remedy and backfill things that might be breaking down. And that's assuming you have the right monitoring in place. So not only is it like alignment and communication, like what are the levers or what are the things that you're looking at on a daily basis to understand the health of your data? Not the perfection of it, but just to understand like, is there anything broken? Are the things that I would expect to capture, are they there? Are they accurate? And then lastly, like how is data being changed? Who can change what and when? Systems, people, and process. And really try and tighten that down so that it's not haphazard. And when it is changed, it's logged, there's history, so you understand who and what is making those impacts.
Yeah, I totally agree. How do you facilitate that? Like, are you driving regular meetings or something between the folks that own, I'm guessing, marketing automation, your CRM, and maybe customer success platforms, or what's your best practice for helping drive that?
Yeah, we're connected at the hip. So we share a roadmap so that there's a clear understanding of priorities across teams and where there might be opportunities to work together because there's collision in the work effort so that we're both prepared and ready for when the implementation goes live. We test, and then we test. We don't work in production systems. We work in sandboxes so that we understand the impact and make sure it works. And then most importantly, and where it makes sense, we leverage UAT and we bring in the sales teams to go and actually, hey, we're doing this change. Here's going to be the enablement. Give us some feedback. Help us understand how this makes your life harder or easier, and help us understand like how would you benefit from these things. And then make sure you fold that feedback into the project and then release. That way, everyone's both aligned to the thing that's happening. No one is surprised by what we're trying to do, and your data is better for it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm curious, any suggestions you have for changes that you've made that have made their lives better, that they've gone through that user acceptance testing and say, yeah, this is going to be fantastic?
Yeah, I know we're trying to stay neutral, but I think one of the first problems I've had to solve in every org that I've been in from a software standpoint has been like routing of demand. They were all inbound companies, and it's always a mess when I get there. It's always, you've got SDR struggling. They're doing all kinds of things, but we really only want them to do one or two, and they're left trying to fend off everything that's coming through the front door. And I would say that's like the easiest solve for me because I've done it, but the one that quickly can yield the most efficiency and impact on the business. Because at the end of the day, you want to create pipeline, and that's where it starts.
Yeah, and you're right, and that's almost always the handoff, isn't it, from marketing over to sales, where balls can get dropped, where tensions can get high, where the marketing team wants them to convert as much as possible, and the sales team's complaining that they're, not great leads, but the marketing team saying, hey, they were fantastic, but you took too long to respond, kind of thing. So, yeah, I think routing is incredibly important. One of the things we found recently that are right along those lines is even just the definition of your lead sources and that sort of thing, and making sure that the data coming out of the marketing automation system maps over to CRM, but also data coming from any other systems. I think you mentioned it before, like integrations, making sure that you aren't getting unexpected pickless values that aren't an option in your system, because that can throw off reports and whatnot as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would say maybe a data dictionary, right? So that there's very clear understandings that, this field, regardless of the label, this is what it's going to mean. This is what it's going to yield, so that when you're making change, teams change, processes change, systems change, you really want to have something to say, but this is the common currency of data, and this is how it's defined and how it's used in our business.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we've done a lot of work in the past with companies, even just helping define like things like what is an account, because a lot of cases, you think of an account as a customer. Well, not always. You may have accounts in your system that didn't become customers. You had an open opportunity with them, but you can also have accounts in your system that never had an opportunity. And so that's where I think that data dictionary becomes important to recognize, like, when is it acceptable to create an account or not. And I know that as companies get more and more mature, some of them will actually lock that down and go through a dedicated stewardship team.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you for that insight. If we move on to the next one, almost everyone today is using a data enrichment provider, and sometimes multiple, right? And these enrichment providers are incredibly important for filling in the firmographics, sometimes the technographics, but the data that's needed in order to facilitate your territories, the routing that you just talked about. What are some of the pitfalls that you see your teams running into when they're enriching?
Yeah, it is ironic that, the data is super important, but because you don't want to impact the prospect experience at the front door, you ask as little as possible.
Yeah.
So that you at least acquire them and then try and figure out, who they are, what they are, where they are, what do they do, all that kind of data. Super important. But they all have their own nomenclature. They all have data points that, you're trying to translate from their own data dictionaries down into your own, and sometimes there's collision. The one I always see the most common is industry. There are so many companies that use so many industry maps. There's enrichment providers out in the marketplace that have their own industry maps. Your CRM probably has its own. And industry it's a great point, because as you proceed, you create accounts, you actually have customers. You're going to want to understand, okay, where are my customers? What do they look like, talk like, smell like? Because that'll inform maybe how you score your inbound demand, where you put your resource and define focus. So it's a very good idea to keep these vendors that you use very close to your changes in your processes, so that you have methods of monitoring, you have scheduled ways to understand, when the enrichments are firing. So you don't have, like, if you have multiple systems, you don't have collision because records are being consumed by one system and locked in another. They're not always cheap. So you want to make sure that you're using the enrichment provider to do certain things and then the other one to do the others, so that, you're not burning out your credits, because most of them are based that way. But overall, you're just going to understand, like, what systems are changing what data, so that, if you ever have to go back and do some cleansing, you know how the data got there to begin with, whether it was enriched or whether it was provided. Because in a lot of cases, it's difficult to say, well, did the customer tell me this? Did a rep put it in? Or is that the system? And you don't know because you weren't tracking it.
That's such a good point. And have you found any tactics to help with that, to be able to tell when a rep changed it versus the automation triggering?
Yeah, the simplest ones are like, make sure your systems have their own dedicated integration users, so that vendor A made this change, vendor B made this change. And then certain fields you're going to want your users to populate, but you're going to want them to have to work off of pick list values. Other fields you probably want the data locked in and don't want it changed. And you want it to work through your RevOps team if there is a change, because you're keeping that data close to your vest. It's super important downstream. You're making business decisions around it. So you don't want someone making a decision about that data point, because that's how they view the world. You want to lock it down in those cases.
Yeah, well, you can see how if it's not locked down, they could try to gamify it or make it sway in their favor for territories and segments and industries, like you said. Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, I like that suggestion of having integration user be that changing state. Do you end up having one kind of generic integration user for all systems, or do you have a different one for each system?
In a lot of cases, it starts with one, but then it makes it difficult because you don't know which system is hanging off of that integration user. So I think recently, like Salesforce allows for multiple. So we're trying to leverage that in our own instance, so that we can at least understand, okay, these systems are hanging off of this user, these are off the other. You generally want to steer away from having your Salesforce admin be the person actually making that connection, because then it looks like they're the ones making all the changes, and you won't be able to discern one or the other. Then if for whatever reason somebody moves off, you've got to remember, oh yeah, I had all those integrations running with that user and we just deactivated them. Now they're all broken.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good point. Very good point. I feel like there's a lot of meat we could dive into every single one of these topics individually and spend the whole hour on them. But yeah, so many questions there. When you're integrating with other systems, I can imagine that there's probably overlap in the data that they're providing. Is there ever opportunities where you're kind of picking and choosing when one data provider is filling in a field versus another? Like if you're filling in data from different countries or continents, anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I try and use one provider at the front door, so like at the lead level, and then generally another provider at the account level, one that I can trust. And then for a subset of that data, I may leverage something more trusted to help me organize the data in a way that is either the gold standard, there's commonality, so that I can determine hierarchies and things of that nature.
Okay, fantastic. And so then, are you having to have a system do that triangulation for you, or is that something that you've set up per field kind of thing ahead of time?
Yeah, we've mapped out, like, we have a lot of integrations they're running, they're scheduled, so that we know when those jobs run and which fields they're touching, so that we don't have collision. And we try and keep multiple providers from touching the same field, so that we know,
Okay.
okay, if this field was changed, it's from that provider.
Yeah, smart. I can see how it would be attractive to find opportunities where the data might be better from one provider in Asia and another one in Europe, etc. But it could also be risky.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so you've now enriched your data. What we've seen in the past is that actually a lot of times when the data is just automatically enriching, it's either in one of two forms. It's when the leads come in, and so they're getting an up-to-date, as of that point in time, copy of their firmographics. And then there's the account data in your system that is receiving the data whenever you've enriched it. But not everyone is going and updating that to keep it relevant, right? As companies change, they grow and they shrink, et cetera. They move offices, they change headquarters. What do you recommend there that people can do, so it's not just a kind of set it and forget it and realize that that data is decayed over time?
Yeah, there's like an element of freshness that you need to monitor. So you can only rely on the third party vendors for so much. Then there has to be some oversight through your team, and then through what you're able to understand. So, for example, if you're working off an account that's maybe not yet a customer or prospect, and your data enriches and says there are 1,000 employees, okay, that's your starting point. But then maybe through the sales cycle, you learn actually there are 500 employees, and you're going to want to leverage that. So you're going to capture that through your sales cycle. But then you sold them 750 units of whatever you sell. Okay, now you've got a different data point. So you'll need ways of understanding those three things and then bringing them together and then having logic to help you make the best decision. So it's a lot more accurate. As much as I love the third party vendors for enrichment, sometimes they're 30s and 60 days old. And with our larger economic conditions today, a lot has changed in the landscape.
Yeah.
And as a result, you need to understand where are you going to get the most freshest data point to truly understand what that account looks like and make the right decisions on both territory, segmentation, coverage, et cetera, so that you're treating it with the right amount of resource.
Smart. Yeah, very smart. I like that. Yeah, we've seen people as well do things like they recognize that throughout the year there's going to be changes, but that for this fiscal year, and Salesforce themselves do this, they'll say, we're just going to lock it in for this fiscal year because we know throughout the year someone's going to grow and shrink, but right now we're calling it a mid-market business, and that at the start of next year we'll refresh that. But we don't want anyone trying to say and argue, well, it used to be mid-market, but all of a sudden because of layoffs or because of growth, it's now fitting into my territory, kind of thing.
I agree. Territory cutting is not fun when you're a big company, for sure. And yeah, you want to do it once, but then I think, at least in what I've seen, the best practice is you want to review it 6 months in to just double check. Where are those outliers that either you missed or the data's moved on you, and understand what those impacts are. But maybe make a decision whether you make those changes or not. I think for us, yeah, I like what Salesforce does. But to the same point, I like holding the accounts where we originally cut them. But if the data's changed. I think I need to know that. I can't wait another fiscal and then think about it, because there's stuff that's going to happen throughout the year with that account that may determine penetration rates, upsell opportunity, et cetera. I need to know, like, right now what that account is.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. And you know what? That was a great segue into the next pitfall. Yeah, territories are obviously incredibly important as it pertains to data quality, right? It's one of the key things that everyone is keeping their data up to date for. What are the pitfalls that you tend to see when you're carving your territories?
I would say no more than this year have I had such a fuller appreciation of just how complex territory management can be and how critical at the same time it is for like a growing business. Think of it this way, like everyone right now in SaaS is trying to do more with less. And that's the tagline for territories. Think about it. You want to be able to carve out a set of territory for your reps so that they have the minimal amount to achieve and exceed their target, so that you can carve another territory for another rep to do the same thing so that they can exponentially grow. The worst thing you're going to want is to overload one rep with a territory and have them not get through all of it, and then you run out of time.
Or the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Sitting around doing
crucial.
nothing.
It's crucial. It's crucial. It's table stakes to actually growing your business in a way that allows for exponential management of your base of customers or potential prospects.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, so any tactics that you'd recommend so that people can avoid kind of that pitfall?
Yeah, I would say one, find out who has dedicated ownership of it. If it's a corner of the desk job on your sales op or rev ops team, you might want to start thinking about like dedicated ownership of just how that's done in a way that it's done quickly and appropriately at the right time of year, so that, as reps get their quotas, they go through sales kickoff, they have their territories. All three of those things are all done in unison so they can march into the year and be successful. I'd say thing two, alongside territories, if you're down this road and if you're big enough, set some rules of engagement, set a document, a sales policy, whatever have you. So it's very clear that, here's how you're going to define territories. Here's how the resources are going to flow into those territories. And here are how things are going to graduate and where change is managed and who's going to impartially adjudicate questions that arise, because questions always arise. And then three, you need
I
a
like how you
system.
phrase that as questions. Yeah.
Yes, questions.
I mean, I'm guessing complaints more than questions, but yeah.
Yep,
Like it.
yep. And three, you need a system. You need a system, especially one that can scale as you grow, that will leverage all this nice data you're collecting to and placing them in the right books so that you can report and understand how large those territories are growing, where one territory is really made up of 20 sub accounts, so that you can stitch them all together, so you can truly understand your motion and where it makes sense. A lot of businesses we want to acquire customers at the front door, and we're happy there. A lot of other businesses are, yeah, we'll take them as they come in, but we want to land them and then grow them at the base. And to me, having a good understanding of how accounts are connected and where you're seeing all those dots start to manifest into a big circle, and then you realize, you've got something here. There's a bunch of companies that are all related that are using your product. You now want to centralize and grow and really have dedicated ownership there.
Yeah, that's so true. And you know what? That's probably the biggest area we've seen in the past from our customers in territory conflicts, was that when they didn't recognize that a business was part of a broader business and they assigned the mid-market account to the mid-market rep and the parent account, which is enterprise, the enterprise rep. And it's not until one of them finds out that the other's working in that same business that the conflict arises.
Think about the frustration that that could potentially be saved from the sales teams with respect to overlapping territories, or the way in which you're going to be viewed through your customers' eyes, because they're on point and they understand your business and the related businesses, and they're, you know what I mean? It's like that single voice coming from your solution into their environment, because they know who you are, and there's not, oh, I didn't know you were talking to Peter and Peter works over here. You'll have to talk to Michael on our side because he handles that account. Like you remove all of those things and you just look more polished.
Absolutely. Well, and it allows you then to create better relationships, but also work on, maybe you have preferred pricing for that vendor. And if the one rep who didn't realize it didn't understand there was preferred pricing, it can cause sour relationships and whatnot, or it can cause, just losing out on a much bigger deal if it's on the flip side.
Customers talk, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, particularly when they're part of the same family, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to find out it's probably one procurement team at the end of the day. But you don't find that out till it's too late. Yeah. So what do you recommend? What tactics have you put in place in the past, or do you see others doing that helps kind of avoid any of those conflicts? So you talked about a few there.
Yeah, so you need a gold standard of truth. We use a vendor that's recognized very well in the marketplace to understanding which accounts are connected to which with respect to just the data. But then you have to figure out a way to mobilize that data across your accounts and then stitch it all together. So, I mean, great plug here, but we use Traction Complete for that. Traction Hierarchies is something I've used 4 or 5 times now, and it really just makes life easier for us, not only for the RevOps teams, but for the sales teams, the CS teams, the support teams, that they can understand the entire account, what it looks like, and the data is like auto-magically being filled in as new accounts are coming through, new accounts are being created. We can really understand and then really actually adjudicate our rules of engagement. You can build a policy, but if you don't have a system that's working to help enforce the policy and manage to it, it's quite difficult, and a lot of emotional baggage comes along with trying to do it otherwise.
Nice. Well, I love the plug. Thank you. I love that you're using the mug too. That's great. Okay, so yeah, we talked about territories and carving and pitfalls there. Territories is one of the massive needs for good quality data, accurate, timely, etc. The other is business planning efforts. And you could argue that the territories fall into that as well, but there's lots more planning and whatnot that goes on. What have you seen as other pitfalls that people fall into when doing their business planning?
Yes, business planning. Love the fall plan. Love kicking it off earlier as possible. But data is both powerful and dangerous in this regard. Data is going to be consumed by your FP&A teams who are going to build a budget. They're going to try to best guess and understand what your base of customers look like, where they're located, how well they're penetrated, to figure out what your expansion targets might be and what your hiring plan needs to look like to support that business. And if you don't have good visibility of that data, or if the data is wrong or skewed in one direction, think about all the things that are going to happen there. You're going to set targets maybe that you can't achieve. You may overhire because you think you have more customers than you have. And you may have a lot of impact in your business in that following year across whoever the stakeholders are that are trying to understand your growth and the trajectory of your company. So it really all starts for me with just like having trusted data that, not just the rev ops and the sales teams can use, but all the other supporting teams can leverage so that they can plan and take actionable insight and use it to make other decisions and strategy and then form tactics from it.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And in order to make better decisions, you want that data to be correct. What are some of the issues that you've run into in terms of the data, and how did you kind of improve that or avoid those that people could take advantage of?
Yeah, you think of a lot of businesses, they use a segmentation model to understand. So this account has X number of employees, and if you're a seat-based company that's selling licenses, you're going to try to sell as many of your seats into that company based on the number of employees they have. Well, if you have 6 accounts for that same customer and there are 1,000 employees, you have 6,000 employees to sell to, or 1,000. So really understanding that, yeah, there's 1,000 here, they're all connected, and rolling that data up. So you know that, okay, you sold 600, you've got 400 potentially more to go, and not, that bigger number of 6,000, and you have how many thousands left to sell. That's super critical because you're going to go and make hiring and, target decisions based on that information. And then exponentially that grows across your base of customers, depending on how many you have. So yeah, that's critical in of itself to be able to aggregate data because you've built a foundation of how your accounts are laid out, where they are, what they're located, what industries they're in, et cetera, and then sort of connect them all up and then use that aggregation to form the model of assumptions that your FP&A teams are going to make about, what targets and hiring and other things that you might set.
Yeah, and it's such massive impacts if you get that wrong, right? You're throwing money away. We've seen it before where the enrichment providers are absolutely necessary, right? You need that firmographic data, and yet we all understand that no data provider is ever going to be perfect. That as much as you try, data changes all the time. And so even if it's 30 days old, well, they might have had a big reduction in force in that time, right? And that's just one example. But so knowing that, we've seen that what can happen is you're using your data provider as your line in the sand to say, hey, as this record comes in, it's getting enriched, we're going to use that data to assignment, and it might be a little bit off. But what pitfall we've seen is that people, when they go back to do their reporting, they can misskew that data to say, wow, we're doing a lot of business in SMB, for instance. And you could imagine that if that was the case, you'd put more reps in SMB, more targeted advertising, more content material targeted towards them. But that if the data is wrong, that if you haven't gone through and validated that actually those accounts were more like upper mid-market, they had 1,000 employees, that sort of thing, that you could be spending a ton of money and time and effort in the wrong direction. And so I think what we've seen from others is regularly steward that data. So kind of trust. What one of our employees talks about, trust but verify. So trust it, but then go verify it later, because when you're making those business planning decisions at the end of the year, the beginning of the year, that you want to make sure you have a really clear picture of who those customers are.
A sales leader I worked in the past had this moniker and I loved it. It was enterprise in disguise. And basically it was some really chunky companies that were mistagged as SMB in the funnel, but they're really enterprise companies. And understanding that, identifying that, helped us put a different routing solution in place to route it to a different kind of seller because they bought differently. And it was an opportunity for us to win a location and then another location, so that we created some virality so that we could move up and try and win corporate. But they were hiding in our data because at that point we were asking the user on the form fill, how big is your company? They were probably thinking, well, my department's 40 people. I'm going to put 40. And they work for like a 1,500 person company.
Yeah. Yeah. Or when they started, they were at 450 people and now they're at 750. And if your line in the sand is 500, now it's on the opposite side of it, but they didn't realize. Yeah, good point. So what have you done? Like, what do you recommend for people to do to help avoid that?
Okay, so if your line in the sand is your enrichment tools, then obviously I think the next thing to be having reporting in place to understand how is this data changing over time. We use a BI tool that helps us look at our data in aggregate if we find some bumps and waves to go and double check or look at that. Within my RevOps function, I have a deal desk team. So as deals come through the funnel, we review it again, right? What was sold, what was on the account, those things make sense, or they jive, maybe do some cleanup there. And then I think it's just like monitoring. Like it's never going to be perfect. I think, data perfection is like an endless thing. Forget it. What you really want is for it to be better and just continually being better over time.
It's so true. Yeah, you're right. You could spend a million years trying to make it perfect and it's constantly out of date. So it's never going to happen. You might as well just strive for improvement. I like that. All right. Well, I think that puts us on to the next pitfall. So now that you have kind of consistent data cleaned up, where you've enriched it with the data provider or not, what's next? What after you've done that are the pitfalls that you've seen that cause people to stumble and cause downside to the business?
Here's where I'm going to put my sales hat on. Sales is hard. I get it. That's why I don't do it anymore. But sales looks at data as a means to an end. All right, it's not the end for sales. Is there something valuable? Is it useful that will help me do the thing that I'm here to do, which is achieve target? Otherwise, it's noise or more work for me. And finding that right balance, putting it and ensuring that the data is in a place where it can be trusted and decisions can be made and it's insightful and useful to sales teams is super important. Has to be simple, has to be easy to find, easy to leverage, has to be as few clicks as possible. So you can find that right balance of, okay, here are the things I absolutely have to have, here are the things would be nice to have, and not trying to like force both of those things down as requirements into sales, because they're either going to not like it, try and do it and complain about it, or they're just going to not do it and go live in spreadsheets and then come back after when the deed is done. So it's super critical to like just keep it simple and invest in tooling that allows them to pull down insight rather easily and doesn't add more work to what they're doing in the day to day.
Yeah, I agree. Particularly if there's any high velocity happening, whether it's outbound BDRs, whether it's inbound responses, or just quicker transactions, you don't want to have your sales reps digging anywhere, right? Like digging on the internet, digging in what somebody used to call it, Salesforce Googling, searching within Salesforce for records. And that it causes issues because if there's duplicate records in there, for instance, maybe they do find an account, but it's the wrong one and there's no previous opportunity. So they can't tell that this account is already a customer and they're going to go, create an awkward conversation. Or the opposite, that they're missing out on opportunities kind of thing.
Much of success in sales is context at the right time. And what I mean by that is, for example, right, there are a lot of customers that, come through the funnel at companies I've been and decide, no, it's not now. It's maybe later. And then making sure that when it is later, you have that context of what that last experience looked like. You iterate from it and change it, and you have another chance to like win at that at bat. That's context at the right time that allows the sales teams to be a little bit more successful and recoup more of what came into that funnel.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Any tactics that you have used in the past to try and get that data, that I can't remember how you phrase it, the context at the right time to those reps?
Yeah, I've heard the phrase used by sales with me a few times, so I'll start using it now. It's like a single pane of glass. What can I do for sales so that they know when they go to this place in our system, they can get like 8 of 10 things that they need right there, right? So for us, that's our account record in Salesforce. We use that to put as much information as possible about the account, if they're a customer, any of that customer data that we capture, any of the usage data that we capture. It's all in one place with any of the notes, old opportunities, and then anything else from the supporting teams, all logged there. So it forms a central hub so that the sales teams have great context when a customer reaches out and they need to understand who owns this account, where are they located, what do they mean to us, and whether there's an opportunity there for them to further it.
Amazing. Yeah. And so what does that actually look like?
That took a while. That took like maybe going back to that first pitfall we talked about is cross collaboration with other teams to ensure that you had the right integrations, sending the right data points to that single pane of glass so that it's filled in, so that it's constantly kept current, so that it's not colliding with other data points, that you have both history tracking to understand how the data is changing, but you also have rules around preventing certain data points from changing because you don't want them to be changed by the humans. It's a lot of effort, but it's a lot of cross collaboration because sometimes a lot of the data lives outside of the RevOps world, and I need to partner with other teams in finance, in marketing, in data engineering to make sure that I'm providing as much as possible for the sales teams to understand their accounts, their book of business, their customers, their prospects, so that they can be successful.
Totally. I agree. And we've seen that in the past where companies are doing a very good job of having a data warehouse or a data lake, and they're carving up all the information and aggregating it, but then fail to give access to the sales reps where they want it. Because even if you give access to the BI tool, they're not going to log out and log in over there to go see information. They need it when they're working on an opportunity. And so a lot of cases, you'll want to see things like even a hierarchy for that instance, the product sold, because sometimes opportunities are for a specific product and not the other, but you want to see all that data at a glance where they're working and not make them go hunt for it, because otherwise they can miss it. But if you can surface it up there on the opportunity record, the contact record, the lead record, anywhere, depending on what they're doing, immediately they can recognize, oh, this is the relationship we already have with them. We've sold them product A, but not product B, or that we had talked to them 6 months ago. And if that information is front and center, the conversations they can be having are so much richer, more effective than if they're just avoiding it or even blundering it because they're already a customer and they're trying to sell them the same thing again.
Context at the right time.
Yeah, love it. Fantastic. Well, I know we're getting a little bit towards the end here, but any other tactics there, Navin, that you would recommend for the listeners that we may not have touched on that'll help kind of avoid any other pitfalls? Because I know that we're just talking about 5 here, but there's a ton of pitfalls that people can go through.
I'm lucky that I'm in a company that has invested in revenue operations, and I've been in a few other companies that realized either early enough or probably too late, they need to invest in revenue operations. If your systems and your integrations and your data are being managed by orgs who have other priorities and it's a side of desk job, it's probably going to suffer. there is a definitive amount of work here that drives the business forward, that actually lays the foundation for data that the rest of the company can pull insight out of to develop strategy, to form tactics, and to prioritize things for growth. And that all starts, from what I've seen in the companies I've been with a high performing RevOps team. So that would be thing one, that if you left this call, go back to your org and really try to understand, like, who owns this RevOps, sales ops function, and how do we get one, and what does good look like? That would be critical.
Nice. Yeah, I believe it. Absolutely. And I think people don't understand how helpful it is until they've actually seen it in place, and how it transforms an entire business, not just sales, not just marketing, but the entire business really improves as a result of the efficiency and whatnot. Yeah,
Agreed.
that's great. We mentioned quickly deduplication, but we didn't actually touch on it. I know that's a big area of conversation. What have you seen as best practice in the past for the analogy we like to use is it's brushing your teeth versus going to the dentist? Do you recommend kind of automatically cleaning up the data constantly as it's coming in, or to go through and do regular cleanups over time? And if so, kind of how frequently?
Automated cleanups would be great. They would just need to meet a specific piece of criteria so that I can trust the automation won't break things. So that, like, customer records aren't being merged or things of that nature. So that, it's light enough where if something merges, it's not the end of the world. It's a good thing. But then as records or the data points become more mature, you're probably going to want more of alerting and reporting to understand those duplicates, and then take action with, like, the humans to actually review it before those changes are actually made. But I would say the starting point is you need visibility. You need to understand how bad this is getting over time. So your dental analogy, yeah, like, how bad is the cavity, right? Are you going to wait until you have to have that tooth pulled, or are you going to go and treat it pretty quickly? Because as all things that we talked about here in data, duplicate data just gets worse over time. It just doesn't automatically get better.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's funny, I actually really like the dentist analogy for a couple reasons. That on certain records, I think it's very safe to kind of prevent them at the point of entry. And for instance, lead records, right? And the reason I say that is because leads, you have different sources. You'll have web leads coming in through your website marketing automation into your CRM, but then you'll have sales reps going to conferences and getting business cards. You'll have data uploads from doing marketing events and whatnot. And that in those cases, you don't want to be emailing the same person twice. And so I think it's safe there to kind of automatically deduplicate. And it's something we recommend to all of our customers. But that on the account side, it becomes trickier for a couple reasons. Sometimes there's internal processes where it's an intentional dupe for whatever reason. And a lot of times that's because of the downstream effect. It's the integration with their ERP system or financial system or whatever. And so you can't just dedupe here and it'll throw off the system there.
Yeah.
So for those situations, it's usually necessary to go and do a concentrate cleanup, go to the dentist, do a cleanup, get it flushed out. And every year it should certainly be done right before territory carving, because otherwise you potentially have the same account in two different territories, or you put both duplicates in one territory, and now that evenness score is thrown off. But that once a year isn't typically good enough. Just like the dentist, usually you're going a couple times a year, because either, like you said, your best practice was to cover those territories or relook at them 6 months in, and to make sure that you haven't created a mess. But the other opportunity is if there was ever an inflection point, some system integration or org merge or something, it's obviously critical there too. So you're not just creating a mess. But what have you guys seen? What do you recommend?
Not all account dupes are bad, like you say. There could be reasons or motions in your business that would require it for whatever reason. What's bad is not knowing they exist, right? Not being able to connect them together so that you understand, okay, I have 3 duplicates of this customer, and this is why, because of whatever reason. But they're all together. They're in that single pane of glass, so that as a seller, I can go in there and I can see that and I can recognize that and understand it. So in that case, yeah, the duplicate's not bad, but it's all together. So the problem or the potential problems that could arise, not that bad because it's known, it's there and visible. It's when they're scattered and then you don't know. Maybe you have 3 reps, or maybe rep 1 stumbles on the record, but it's owned by rep 2 and they can't find their record. You know what I mean? Then territories get misaligned, then you lose no on the spot context. That's when it gets dangerous. So yeah, from your leads example, I love leads for living with marketing. Sales, you can work leads, you don't create them. You don't live in that realm. That's sort of the marketing realm. The minute we want sales involved, you convert, create an account, work off contacts. That's your world. But leave marketing and leads.
Nice. Yeah. That's great. Well, listen, I know we have just under 10 minutes left, and I think we see a whole bunch of questions here. You okay if we throw it out to the audience?
Sure.
Okay, so the first one, and I'm going to read this off, so bear with me here. Mario says, how do you guys handle territory ownership / transfer mid-quarter when you have reps leave the org? Many orgs don't like to recut territories or transfer records, so instead they have a manager oversee it until they hire a new rep. What do you recommend, Navin?
Yeah, so I think when that happens, we would put that book of business in a placeholder or under the manager's name or a team leader name until that backfill comes in, so that when we have that account, it can be moved over pretty quickly, or some other way of tagging it so that the territory construct itself is not lost. But by placing it within another human, if you have alerts firing that, hey, this person put their hand up or something's happened on the account, it's still going to someone so that they can sort of manage it in the interim. Too often it gets put with like an integration user or some dormant user. Some things are happening, some tasks that assigned, and no one's taking action.
Yeah, I love that. You're exactly right, because there's in any given territory, there's kind of the active opportunities that you absolutely want to hand off to somebody. Maybe it's a manager if they're going to continually work it, but if they're too busy, you want to get it to an individual rep. And then there's the accounts that they've been trying to work on, and those ones are highly likely that there's a hand raised throughout. You want someone to own. I agree. And then there's the future world that just may be part of their territory they haven't started to navigate yet. And I agree with you. I think it's best to have that in the hands of somebody so that they're aware if somebody does come up and they're not just sitting there ignored, leaving business on the table. Yeah, that's great. Okay, next question. How do you differentiate between account level data and the person level data that makes up an account? For example, do you rely on firmographic employee count data, or do you look at individual arrivals / departures for key decision makers?
That's a good one. I mean, the enrichment tools that I use, there's a pretty clear line between where I would trust them. Vendor 1, love them at the account level. Vendor 2, pretty good at both, but way better at the contact or person level. We leverage the account for making decisions around, how big they are, where they're located, etc. Then at the person level, we take into certain things into account because people work all over the world, and your rules around how you market to them, privacy, etc., may be governed a little differently. So you need to capture both. But when it comes to carving out territories or understanding assignments, that's done at the account level. But you also have to have an eye on like managing duplicates or just how you market to people within those customers. You've got to take into account like the person level.
Yeah. Very good point. Okay, next question. What's your take on allowing personal email addresses on form fills?
Not a fan because the enrichment providers just stopped working. So that wonderful form you built with the least amount of friction so that you can get the person to complete it, all of a sudden has very little information on it because you can't enrich. So you need to make some conscious decisions around, what you're going to do and what things you can take at the form level. At the end of the day, though, some people don't want to use their business email. So you'll need to figure out other ways of trying to scoring their intent to determine whether it makes sense to apply sales resource to it. But it's a difficult one. I think I haven't been at a company where, personal email was a great conversion. So you allow it to go through. If it's a hand raise with commentary, you kind of deal with those. but in a lot of cases, I'm of the opinion that I would love to prevent it as possible.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you if you can, it's nice to also vet how interested that person is in your material. So if you log it down and say it's got to be a work email address and they're less likely to fill it out, they're probably not that interested. Or maybe the content needs to have a better hook to it, kind of thing. But Alejandro here brings up a kind of follow-on question. He says, what about personal email addresses in a product-led growth strategy?
Yeah. So, 1Password, we have a product that you can sign up for a trial and move forward. We accept anyone to come in and experience it. I think what you're really asking for are two things, because in a PLG motion, that person has made a choice that they want to experience the product and find their aha moment before they talk to a human. And you need to respect that. So you need to allow them to go through, but then through your content and marketing and through their adoption of the product, you need to have very good understanding of like, where are they on their journey? And at what point does it make sense to sort of reach out and try to learn more, whether it be through your content that you're sending to them, or eventually they've reached a certain like criticality of adoption that now it makes sense to try and reach out with a human.
Totally. And those I've seen people go through progressive profiling. So allowing the personal email address to start and then progressively asking them for more detail. So you're not hindering their adoption immediately, but trying to ask more as they're kind of adopting, which has gone really, really well. All right. We have time for a couple more here. Ben asks, when you're building territories with hierarchies, should one sales rep own an entire parent and all its subsidiaries?
I'm a big proponent of like a single owner here. You need to have the right person. Like if your business is segmented, then you need to think of the entire hierarchy and where that should sit in the right segment, and then assign a single rep to it. I think that makes the most sense. Obviously, there may be some accounts like the dreaded Berkshire Hathaway, obviously,
Just gonna say,
yeah, where there's just like so many amalgamated businesses. So yeah, there's going to be some exceptions. But generally, yeah, if you have a size of company and a base of prospects and customers where you're not overburdening reps, because there's some load balancing that you need to figure out too, then yeah, I'm of the proponent that that's simpler to maintain, simpler to develop policy around, and then simply just to carve when you're doing your territories. It allows that continuity of relationship, because the thesis there is that if they're all connected and related, we're going to be able to name drop, customer A to customer B, because they're in the hierarchy, they're using your product. So you're going to want to be able to leverage that relationship, and then ultimately use that, to your product and company's advantage to grow your base.
Totally. I entirely agree. I feel like when it's part of a traditional business, so I'll talk about Berkshire in a minute, but you get so much more efficiency and effectiveness from allowing one person to own the entire tree. And I say that because a lot of times you'll have either a strategic named account rep who only owns one or two, or an enterprise rep where they only own a handful. Either way, these reps, like you said, sales is hard. And some of these reps have quotas that are just enormous. They'll have to do $5 million, $10 million, $20 million a year from just a few accounts. Well, if they don't own the subsidiaries, what chance do they have of closing that business? But on top of that, you're right, it helps them have that cohesive strategy, build a enterprise level deal for the entire tree, which is usually where those big deals come from, to say, yeah, we're going to sell it as a cohesive package and everyone can take advantage of it, kind of thing. So yeah, I entirely agree. As for the situations like the Berkshire Hathaways, I would say that ties into what's your definition of a hierarchy. And when there's situations like a holdings company, you need to be able to steward that data to effectively call out that Geico is really a different business from BNSF Railways, from Fruit of Loom Underwear, from Benjamin Moore Paints, right? Those are all very different industries. So the rep that's working on the Geico insurance is in FinServe. The one working on BNSF Railway is in transportation logistics, right? So, and there's retail, et cetera, et cetera. Those are different businesses. And so one rep should own all of Geico. but they shouldn't necessarily own all of Berkshire. So when you're defining your territories, defining your hierarchies, you need to consider that and then steward it accordingly.
Exactly.
So listen, I know we're out of time. I apologize. There's 2 more questions here we're not going to get to, but I just want to thank you, Navin, for coming in and answering all these questions. I want to thank everyone for joining. We talked about data consistency, accuracy, cleaning up the data, making it available immediately, but also the timeliness of it, so keep it refreshed. And I hope that everyone's taken something out of this. But if you have any questions, by all means, reach out to us at any time. Love to chat with you about how our products can help and how we've helped others in the past. So thanks very much, guys. You can come to our website, tractioncomplete.com, or follow us on social on LinkedIn. Thanks so much, Navin.
You're welcome.
Take care, guys.